My wife says, when you die, I'm throwing all this junk away. Ah, good, 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 good. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm at where Larry and I are most of the time, Philadelphia City Hall.
Is there
If,
still a press room there?
huh?
Is there still a press
Well,
room?
there's still a press room, but I just don't feel like interacting with mice today.
Oh, whoa. On a move.
I just don't feel like interacting with mice. So I said, we're not going to do that. Luckily,
Uh,
Vince has been kind enough to, loan me some space in his office.
Okay, okay.
So I'm going to, Larry has a doctor's appointment, so he's not going to be able to join us today.
Hmm.
But I'm going to get started and I'm going to just get started by saying, you're listening to Hall Monitor, WPPM, and I'm going to introduce you and then we're going to talk.
Okay, good. I'm good to go.
All right. Well, you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5. I'm Denise Clay Murray, and I'm here with Linn Washington. He is a professor in the Department of Journalism at Temple University and one of the reporters that is still at and was one of the reporters that was there when the MOVE confrontation of 1985 happened. We're talking about the 40th anniversary of MOVE. So we thought that probably the best person we could have to come on and talk about that is Linn. And thank you so much for joining us. I guess my first question for you is, I guess it's been 40 years since all of this happened. As somebody who reported on it, is it still as fresh a memory for you as it was when it happened?
Uh, the short answer is yes. It's been 40 years, 40 long years, and I guess I got a few more gray hairs since then. Um, the memory, though, has remained fresh not only because of the just the outrageous quality of the event itself is something you just don't forget, but over the years, I've done quite a few interviews, so that just keeps things fresh in my mind, as well as, writing about it and doing some creative projects like this six-part podcast that we did through Temple's Logan Center for Urban Investigative Journalism. We took a look at MOVE, and it's unusual in that we looked at MOVE not just within the context, or should I say the confines of May 13th, 1985, but we took it all the way back from the inception of to the inception of MOVE as an organization in the early 70s, and actually rolled it back to the birth of the founder of MOVE, a guy named Vincent Liepert, who later became John Africa. So the short answer to your question is yes, it stays fresh in my mind.
So you mentioned the podcast because when I talk to people who are much younger than me,
Hmm.
I kind of have to go through like a process of explaining MOVE and explaining that while 85 is the confrontation we talk about the most, because let's face it, it's not every day that somebody drops a bomb on a city block in a major American city.
Hmm.
But there were issues prior to that. As someone who is around young people all the time, what do young people know about MOVE and what happened? And I guess, how does the podcast help with that?
Well, the podcast helps in providing explanations for how 1985 started. And one direct line for the causation of 1985 was an incident that happened on August 8th, 1978. That's when there was another shootout between the MOVE organization and police. An officer was killed. As a result of that, nine MOVE members were sentenced to 30 to 100 years in prison, and moves efforts to gain the release of those people is what laid the foundation for 1985. However, 1978 just didn't occur in a vacuum. You have to take it back to March of 1976 when there was a confrontation between members of MOVE and police, not a gun battle, but a physical battle. And during that incident, a MOVE baby was killed. And so from 1976, you could see the radicalization of MOVE and their I guess, stated determination not to take it anymore, and that led to all these confrontations. So yeah, there's some background there. Mm. Now, in terms of young people or younger people understanding it, we know that there is a practice in America of disappearing certain events, and most times those events involve Black people. So it's not surprising that people would not understand what happened or even know about 1985. For example, the school system of Philadelphia just started integrating MOVE and the 1985 event into its history curriculum. So generations of students have come through Philadelphia schools without knowing anything about MOVE. And you say, oh, this is unusual. Well, no, not really. Because if we look at another event that took place in May, another bombing event that took place in May, and this one was in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921, they disappeared that from the local memory. So I remember seeing a documentary on the events in Tulsa where bigots in a biplane dropped gas bombs on a black neighborhood during a riot where, white folks went in, racist people went in, and just decimated this very prosperous community. The distinction between Tulsa and Philadelphia is that in Philadelphia, it was authorized police who did the bombing, where in Tulsa, it was freelancers. But getting back to why Tulsa was forgotten, I remember hearing or seeing a documentary, and one of the scenes was a guy who had recently graduated from college, and he was recounting how when he went to college and he was in a class, and the professor was saying, "Well, this, and that happened in Tulsa, and I want to let you know." And this guy stood up and said, "Hey, wait a minute, I'm from Tulsa. I don't know what you're talking about. It never happened." And he was shocked when he found out that something like that happened in his city and he didn't know about it. So it's not surprising that people in Philadelphia wouldn't know what happened in May of 1985.
Now, because this is the 40th anniversary, you're hearing a little bit more chatter about MOVE and what happened in 1985 in places where you wouldn't expect to hear it. Like, for example, at City Council, they passed a resolution, calling for Tuesday, the actual date, May 13th, to be a day of commemoration or a day of reflection about what happened. Did you ever see something like that coming from City Council happening, you know, back then? Because let's face it, the order to drop the bombs came from City Hall.
Yeah, the police commissioner on his own volition took the made a series of despicable decisions. One was to construct a bomb. One was to authorize the dropping of that bomb on a house that they knew had children in it. And they dropped the bomb in a place where they knew there was a 5-gallon can of gasoline. And then that was compounded by another despicable decision to let the fire burn, to use the fire as a tactical weapon to get the move people out of that house, only to have people who were attempting to flee return to that burning structure because they encountered gunfire that allegedly came from police. So the fact that city council finally got around to making a public apology is quite unusual. There's been a series of incidents in Philadelphia where the city council never apologized for it. In May of 1838, there was a facility a brand new building that had just been built by abolitionists, people who were opposed to slavery, in a mob burned the place to the ground. And the reaction from the city, the official sources. There was an investigation, and they placed the blame on the abolitionists. That they said, well, people didn't like the fact that people were opposing slavery, and that blacks and whites were able to walk down the street together, and that outraged people. And so that was that was excused. But let's understand the timeline. City Council commendably, um, what was it, maybe 3 years ago, passed this apology. The year before that, there was an effort to effectuate some kind of apology, and the then mayor of the city, a guy named Jim Kenney, opposed it. And a year later, City Council made that apology, and that apology also contained the language that they, I guess, reapproved recently, saying that May 13th should be a day of remembrance and reflection. But prior to that, maybe 4 or 5 years prior to that, there was the erection of a historic marker that was placed on Cobbs Creek Parkway, recognizing May 13th, 1985, for the historic and horrific event that happened there. How did that historic marker get there? Well, it wasn't from city council. It wasn't from the civic community. It wasn't from the business community or the political community. It was the result of actions by a group of charter school, middle school kids in West Philadelphia. They had been assigned by their teacher to look at the issue of police brutality in West Philadelphia. And these young students discovered the move bombing. And they were outraged by the fact that 5 children died. 5 children were murdered in this incident, and nobody seemed to care. So it was their effort, their campaign that got this historic marker. They did something that shamefully adults had not done in what, 30 or 35 years, or, or just to say for decades. And then city council finally stepped forward and did something through the efforts, and we have to, give credit where credit's due. Councilwoman Gautier, who represents West Philadelphia, took that initiative to say, "Hey, wait a minute, we have to finally do something and recognize this event."
Now, it's funny that you bring up the marker, because I covered the press conference where the young people from the charter school came and put the marker and unveiled the marker.
Mhm.
For a while, there was a dispute about where the marker itself should go, whether it should be on Cobbs Creek Parkway or whether it should be in front of the house where it happened, like just about every historical marker in the city is.
Right.
To me, that speaks to the relationship that Philadelphia has with the history and who tells the story of Move. Because it's one of those stories that I call it a third rail, meaning that if you touch it, you're going to end up electrocuted no matter what.
Right.
But how do I guess, why is that still the case? Because, it's not like everybody doesn't know exactly what happened here. Why can't we still discuss this in a way that talks about the totality of it without, almost causing a riot?
Mhm. That is a very good question, and it raises some issues that Philadelphians and Americans, just like to forget. We had this incident. Nobody wants to like really deal with it in its totality. In some ways, I can understand the now residents of Osage Avenue not wanting that marker on there, as if nobody knows that 6221 was where this thing took place. Putting it on Cobbs Creek Parkway, I think, is a good compromise. But again, it kind of like puts blinders on it, because the historic marker or no historic marker, people are still going to be coming back to Osage Avenue wanting to see what happened and where it happened, and they're going to be stopping in front of 6221. I've been there a couple of times with news reporters from France and other places who were there to do a story on this, France, Canada, England. And I remember at one time, we were standing in front of the 6221 and talking, and from behind the closed the door, you heard this, could you please get in front of, leave from in front of the house, show some respect for the house. And yeah, you agree to it. But, the neighbors want some form of, I guess, stability. They don't want people coming. But the fact is that that happened there. But again, the fact that they don't want it in a certain place, I mean, there's a lot of historic markers that have been vandalized because certain people don't want the recognition that happened. I'm thinking of one of a guy named Sam Francis. He was the cook, the official, chef for George Washington. And George Washington actually asked him to come from New York City, where he had a tavern down in the Wall Street area. Well, Sam Francis was a black man. But to this day, there's some discussion of whether he was a black man or whether he was a swarthy skinned white man from the Caribbean. He was a black dude. They called him Black Sam. Come on, but that marker has been vandalized and moved. Some people don't want it in Society Hill, but that's where the guy's residence was. So what we see going on, what went on Osage Avenue is not that unusual in terms of this. Well, we want to be a city of history, but there's certain history that we really don't want to recognize, or at least.
Now, what during the council meeting where they passed a resolution commemorating the 40th anniversary of the move bombing, Michael Africa was there,
Mhm.
and he has apparently bought 6221 Osage and is hoping that the city will help him, put some money toward paying it off, something
Mhm.
I doubt. But he also brought up the fact that as a condition of buying the house, he was not allowed to put any commemoration of what happened there. Is that's weird, don't you think?
Yeah, that's weird. In terms of a deed restriction through a mortgage, that is kind of weird. You know, um, you can't paint your house pink, or you have to pay the water bill. That's not your bill, but it was from the previous owner. You can understand that, but to put that kind of stipulation in is quite unusual. But the reality is that after the mortgage is settled, after it's paid off, um, the owner, now Mike Africa, can do what he wants to do with it. So yes, that is weird. And there's two things. One, the city, the city didn't operate in a fair manner with that particular property. The property was owned by a woman named Louise James. She was a sister of John Africa, and yes, she was an active member of the organization. But for the longest time that she owned that house since 1958. Well, she purchased it and paid it off. That was her retreat. So whatever was going on with Move, she didn't bring that on to Osage Avenue. And in the year before May 13th, 1985, Move, her brother and her son had ejected her from the house. So it wasn't that she was there, authorizing Move to, act the way they did in terms of terrorizing their neighbors. So there should have been a little more consideration for her. In the aftermath of the destruction of the whole 6200 block of Osage Avenue, the city actually sent her a bill for the demolition of her house, for just tearing down the walls of the house that they burned down. And then they gave her a settlement. I think they said, well, we're going to give you $20,000 for the house. She never cashed the check. She said, I want my house back. When the houses were initially built back in very poor condition, that, subsequently a lot of people had to move because of serious code violations, they would not return the property to her, although it was her house. And for over a decade or more, that house or that property was served as a police mini station. It was a mini station in that one officer was assigned to sit in that house all day long for years and years and years. So it wasn't like police cars were coming in and out of there. Mike Africa Jr., who is the grandnephew of, yeah, that would be the grandnephew of John Africa, wants the property back in the possession of Move because he said that he had promised his aunt that to get her house back. You know, on her deathbed, she said, "I just want my house back." And that's what he wants to do. And part of his thinking, I mean, one, he's trying to do a GoFundMe to raise money to help pay off this mortgage, which is now in excess of $300,000. But he wants the city to pay some of it. The city, in this latest go round, where the houses were rebuilt and now sold at market rates of hundreds of thousands of dollars, they initially gave it to a developer, you know, the series of houses on there for $1. And Mike Africa says that he went to the city when he heard that and said, "Since you're selling it for $1, I'll pay you $1 for the house." And they said, "No, you can't have it." So this is again some of this manifest unfairness that underlies this whole move conundrum. You know, Mike Africa is totally different in terms of his actions and his attitudes than some of the move members from the 70s and 80s. And the city should have made some consideration to return that property to Louise James because she, at that point, was cooperating with the city and in many ways had given them the predicate to go in and serve the eviction because initially the city's posture is, well, we can't just get rid of somebody because the neighbors don't like it. Well, it was a little more than not liking it. Move was engaged in gross housing code violations that gave the city more than a predicate to go in and take care of it. For just one quick example, I mean, they cordoned off the driveway in the back. That was a clear violation. They should have been held to account for that. But the bottom line is that Louise Africa should have retained ownership of the house that she had paid for. But the city, again, just operating in a unfair way, said, "No, you can't get back in." And at that point, she was not. You know, she didn't say, "Okay, well, we're just going to open this thing back up again and continue this effort to get the release of the jailed move members."
Now, I guess for my last question,
Hmm.
where is Move now? I mean, you hear different things about them. I mean, you kind of know they exist, but where is Move now? And is there more than one Move?
From my understanding, Move has somewhat splintered. There's the faction represented by Mike Africa Jr. His parents were two of the Move Nine. He was actually born in a jail cell in August of 1978 when that incident happened. His mom was pregnant, and a week or so, a couple of weeks after she was incarcerated for that incident, you know, held for trial, he was born. And actually, the first few days of his life were lived in a prison cell in one of the Philadelphia prisons. Then there is a faction, if you want to call it that, of some of the original Move members, and particularly some of those who had been released from prison after 40 years. There's another faction of what we say perhaps second generation Move members, those who grew up in the organization. They've turned against the organization because they said that they were abused as children. They weren't allowed to read and write. You know, they were cloistered. Some of them were married off as young as 12 and 13 years old. So yeah, the organization is splintered. There's still a belief in the efficacy and the propriety of John Africa's philosophies, but how those philosophies are to be implemented currently, there's a couple of strains of direction within the MOVE organization.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Lynn. We really appreciate you coming on. And in the interest of full disclosure, Lynn was my first editor at the Philadelphia Tribune, and he was one of Larry's professors at Temple in the MJ program. So we couldn't think of anybody we wanted to have on to talk about this than somebody that we respect as much as you.
Well, thank
So,
you.
so thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your interest. And, I have, as you know, I've expressed this eternal, respect for you. Because when I was your first editor, you came to me with a story about something called AIDS. And I said, wait a minute, you talk about friends that help you and AIDS? You said, no, it's this disease, this epidemic. And I see you as one of the first persons that really dealt in depth with that story. So that's a compliment to your news foresight. And of course, Larry was one of my students, but again, a great story. He wanted to cover city council and city government. I said, well, you may need to start hanging out in City Hall. And of his own volition, he did that. And now you got the hall monitor where you guys are doing a tremendous public service in providing information on city government to the citizens of the city of Philadelphia.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cool.